In honor of the Thanksgiving weekend here in the US, please enjoy this re-release of The Rules of Dysfunctional Families. Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to the Mental Wellness Wake-Up Show, a weekly podcast where growth-minded, creative people come to learn best practices from both spirituality and psychology that create lasting well-being. I am your host, mental wellness expert, improvised acting teacher, therapist, and coach, Dawn McMillan. Let's get to it. What I want to talk about today are the 4 rules for dysfunctional families. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, there are functional families? Yes, there are. And I have met some of these people who grew up in functional families and who are actually creating functional families. They do exist, these people. And I got to tell you, they're a little weird. I'm joking, but there is something to be said for acknowledging that as much as no one makes it to adulthood unscathed, because just being a person on this planet means that things happen, you're going to get your feelings hurt, you're going to have obstacles to overcome. But that doesn't mean that there aren't functional families out there. So if you did not grow up in a functional family, you are not alone, and there is hope. We can make the future better than the past. So the 4 rules of dysfunctional families really plays into this idea, and I think it's accredited to Mark Twain, that like happy families are all alike, but dysfunctional families are unique, or something like that. I'm butchering that quote. But you can boil down some common themes to dysfunctional families, regardless of what the primary source of that dysfunction might be. Before we jump into that, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you by stopping by iTunes and Spotify and leaving reviews and voice messages. And I really want to thank you for sharing this podcast with other people. It means the world to me that you do that. And I know I say that and it's like, ooh, it's a cliche. You keep saying that. It comes from a deep well in my soul when I say that. So thank you. So let's talk a little bit about, how do you know you were in a dysfunctional family? One way is by looking at the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Survey. So the ACEs were developed to track some of the things that happen in childhood that have long-term effects. So the higher your score on the ACEs, and traditionally it's been a 10-question survey, the more likely you are to have some pretty unpleasant ongoing experiences as an adult. So let's just talk about what the ACEs cover. So it's going to cover potentially traumatic events that occur during childhood. It's going to be about violence, abuse, neglect, violence in the community, having a parent or a caregiver be unavailable due to death or substance use or imprisonment or mental health and instability. So if you look at the big picture, about 61% of adults surveyed reported they had at least one. 1 in 6 reported that they had at least 4. So there is a correlation between ACEs and heart disease, ACEs and early death, ACEs and adverse economic outcomes. It's really very costly. So I'm looking at the CDC right now, and they say that the economic and social cost of families, communities, and society totals hundreds of billions of dollars every year. So having this childhood trauma situation is actually very costly, not only to the individuals experiencing it, but to all of us. So if you look back on your family and you did have abuse or neglect or an unavailable parent due to any of the items that I listed before, you are you are much more in danger of chronic diseases like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, suicide. It really is, it is occurring. And, I've met a lot of people who have 9. I've met a few people who have 10. So if you think that your risk of poor outcomes increases with every single one, that having 4 or more is considered to be an extreme risk for unhealthful adult living. It gives you an idea of the impact that growing up in a dysfunctional family can have. So if you're curious, you can type adverse childhood experiences, and there's lots of resources out there, and you can take the test and see what your score is. I have a friend who has a really high ACE score and happens to be one of the most functional people that I know. So it is possible to have a dysfunctional family and turn out okay, because we also have protective factors, some of which really have to do with having a little bit more economic security, or having a safe place to go to. So, for example, children who grow up in poverty, but they have a middle class or upper middle class or wealthy friend, have a better outcome than those kids who don't. And it's because some of the effects of their own environment get mitigated by spending time with this other family. You know, um, like my kids have always had what I call second moms, right? So not only are my children exposed to the culture of my family, they're also exposed to the culture of their dad's family and then of their surrogate families. And so that can be a really big protective factor. Okay, enough about the ACEs. I just wanted to invite you to know that this dysfunctional childhood experiences are important, and they do matter. So, what is the dysfunctional family? How does it work? Um, the way that it kind of has its effect really has to do with toxic stress. So, toxic stress is going to be excess activation of the stress response system over time. So, your fight, flight, freeze, or fawn or fix system is designed for short bursts. But if you're in an unhealthy environment as a child, you're being verbally or sexually abused or physically abused, you're seeing one of your parents abuse the other, um, you're being raised by a stranger because your parents had substance abuse issues and CPS had to get involved. Poverty, racism, community violence, your own mental illness. These things can cause toxic stress, and it's wear and tear on the body and brain. Like, just imagine revving your engine for days and weeks on end. It just wears things out. So, if you are someone who grew up in a dysfunctional home, all is not lost. You can do reparative relationships as an adult. You hear that phrase, chosen family? That's healing. Having a strong community wherever you find it, whether it's your improv troupe, your baseball team, or your church, or wherever, that's also restorative. And of course, quality therapy can be restorative. So all is not lost. But if my talk about adverse childhood experiences isn't ringing any bells for you, maybe if I tell you what the 4 rules of dysfunctional families are, you might think, oh, that sounds familiar. Maybe I was affected in a way that's just not obvious to me. So the 4 rules of dysfunctional families are: don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, be perfect. So what does that all mean? Don't talk. Like, one of the rules of a dysfunctional family is secrecy, right? If you talk about the problems, if you talk about your feelings, if you talk about it, then people will know, and the dysfunctional family will not be able to maintain its appearance of being okay. So don't talk. It's not okay to talk about your problems. And this can become a pattern so that in later life we have, we often have the stereotypical couple that goes into therapy and he never talks about his feelings and, she's whatever she is. But that's part of how we learn to cope in our family of origin sometimes is if you don't talk about it, then we can pretend like it's not happening. Or if you do talk about it, be indirect. Be indirect. Don't actually say what it is so that you always have plausible deniability, or you can say, I didn't say that. I didn't mean that. Or you want to triangulate and not speak to anyone directly. You want to send someone else as your messenger. So, number one is don't talk. And number two is don't trust. Don't trust anyone outside the family. But then maybe you also learned you can't trust anyone in the family. Hand in hand with dysfunctional families is gaslighting. You're looking around and you're thinking, this is crazy. This is chaotic. I'm seeing my stepfather abuse my mother, but they say that they love each other. I can't make sense of that. And so they're like, no, we're great. Everything's fine. Or, you keep being told you're fine. You're fine. Don't worry about it. You're fine. You're like, I don't feel fine. There's some kind of gaslighting that goes on in dysfunctional families. And so there's definitely that sense of don't trust. Don't trust your own perceptions. Don't trust your family because maybe, the people who are supposed to be loving you are the ones who are hurting you. And don't trust outsiders. That goes along with the don't talk, right? They don't understand what it's like for us. So anyone who's not us could be a danger. Don't feel. Feelings are scary. If you grow up in a house with a rager, you learn that feelings are terrifying. Or if you're sad and you're told boys don't cry, or, cut that out, it'll give you something to cry about. Or what are you so happy about? We don't have food on the table today. Keep it down, right? There's all these ways in which our feelings are made to be wrong one way or another. So don't express your feelings. And even better, don't have them. If you don't have feelings, no one can hurt them. And if you don't have feelings, you're not inconveniencing anyone with your needs. It's a lot, right? And the corollary to that one is don't be selfish. A lot of us are given the message that having feelings and having needs is selfish, especially in those homes where there's neglect. Neglect can be a harder one to piece out, not to piece out, but to understand, because sometimes it's not about abuse is about what people did to you that they shouldn't. Neglect is what people should have done for you, but didn't. So if your emotional needs are not being met, that's a form of neglect. Even if your parents meant well, even if you had all of your material needs met, right? You had food on the table, a roof over your head, all of those things, but you never felt loved. That's one of the questions on the ACEs. Did you feel like no one loved you or appreciated you in your household? So wanting to feel loved, wanting to express your feelings, maybe even wanting to earn your own money and to keep it. There's a lot of households in which any money that children get has to be given to the whole family because the whole family needs it, and to want to keep that for yourself would be considered selfish. I mean, there's a million of examples, but the idea is feelings are not safe. They shouldn't be expressed openly, and maybe it's just kind of best if you don't have them. And then the last one is be perfect. Don't rock the boat. Don't embarrass me. Make the family proud. Be strong, be good, be right, be perfect. Be strong, be good, be right, be perfect. Make us proud, and don't rock the boat. And going along with that one is do as I say, not as I do. So you will there's several roles that happen in dysfunctional families, and they are pretty darned predictable. So one of them is the black sheep, often referred to in therapy circles as the identified patient. So this is the one in the family who's getting arrested, who's sneaking out at night, smoking cigarettes. This is the one that everyone points to as a problem. You also have the hero, and this is the one who is strong, good, right, and perfect, who makes us proud, who gets straight A's, who's the president of every club, never asks for anything, gets the after-school job, puts their, picks up the younger children from daycare or whatever, right? There's always that role. There are other roles as well, but those two tend to show up in all dysfunctional families. The one who is blamed or identified as being the dysfunction, and then the hero who is able to uh, keep it together in a way that's accepted by the family. Of course, depending on the rules of the family, what perfect looks like could be different, right? So in a classic middle class family, perfect is going to look like, the example that I just gave, always look good, get the grades, speak politely to strangers, make everything look perfect to the outsiders. In a different family, being perfect may be the one who gets into the gang earliest and is able to start making money selling dope out on the streets and starts bringing in the most money at the youngest age, right? So it just depends. But one of the reasons I wanted to bring all of this forward is that many of us are so used to the rules and the culture of our families, we, first of all, don't know that they're quite dysfunctional. Or if we do, it can feel inescapable, but it's not. So if the 4 rules of dysfunctional families are don't talk, don't feel, don't trust, be perfect, we can start to do our work simply by reversing those rules. Do talk, have feelings, and talk about them. Go to therapy, go to 12-step, go to social support groups and learn what feelings are. There are more than 2. We are not just fine and upset. There's a whole lot more feelings than that. And the more you're able to name your feelings, the better able you are to manage them. So do what you got to do, feel your feelings, and learn safe and healthy ways to express them. And talk about what you think, talk about what you feel. Find safe people and talk to them. But wait, Dawn, didn't you just say one of the rules is don't trust? So learning to trust. And this one can be so hard, right? I often say with clients, sometimes our pickers are broken. We keep picking people who keep playing out the cycles of dysfunction that we found ourselves into. So learning to trust is an act of discernment, but taking the risk to trust is an act of liberation. So if any of this sort of tickled in the back of your mind, or if you were already aware, yeah, my family I grew up in is messed up, do talk, do feel, do trust, and let go of perfection. Social media gets a lot of blame right now for people's mental health, and I think it's that highlight reel aspect of it. I was on LinkedIn earlier today, and everyone's just ecstatic about all of these accomplishments, and isn't that great, and Instagram, and the Pinterest perfect house and all of that kind of stuff. It can reinforce that rule of be perfect, or at least seem perfect, and beat yourself up with shame if you are not. So the more we let go of that being perfect, and the more we embrace ourselves with all of our glorious imperfections, with all of our air quotes flaws, the more we say, you know what? I'm not perfect, and that's okay. And oh, by the way, no one else is either. So the invitation is to talk, to feel, to trust, and be beautifully, gloriously, messily your true self, stepping forward in genuosity. And with that, I celebrate you, whether you are one of those strange people who grew up in a functional family. I'm looking at you, Melissa. Or like, the rest of us. I celebrate you. Because if you're listening to this, you're someone who knows that there's a greater possibility available to you, and you are willing to take the risk to seek it out. So I celebrate you, and I remind you that you, glorious, beautiful, messy, imperfect human, are whole, perfect, and complete as you. When I say you're perfect, I'm not talking about your Pinterest, Instagram highlight reel. I'm talking about the glorious, amazing being that you are in this moment is perfect for this moment. And you are totally, completely worthy and deserving of all good things. Until next time, you amazing, glorious person, you.